Ethan Cole was a man who lived in a world of business deals, boardrooms, and private jets. To most people, he was known as a billionaire, a man who had built a fortune with his own sharp mind and endless hours of work. But at home, he was simply a father, though not always the most present one. His daughter, Ava, was 16, bright, and full of spirit, but she often felt her father's absence. After her mother passed away years ago, the house had become quieter, colder, and more formal. Ethan had relied heavily on the staff to manage the house, and one of the most constant presences was Miss Lila, the maid who had worked for them for over a decade. Ethan had always been strict with boundaries. To him, staff were employees, not family. He provided fair pay, benefits, and stability, but he believed that lines needed to stay clear. He grew up in a strict household himself, where respect was shown through distance, not closeness. That belief stayed with him, and so he carried it into his own home. He never thought much about how those rules felt to the people living under them. After several long months overseas managing a new deal, Ethan finally decided to return home. The return was supposed to be a surprise. He had wrapped up business faster than expected and wanted to see Ava before she left for a school camp. It was an early evening, and the city lights blinked outside the tinted windows of his car as the driver pulled into the large gates of his mansion. Ethan leaned back in his seat, imagining Ava's face lighting up when she saw him earlier than planned. As he stepped inside, suitcase in hand, he expected silence. Usually, the house was quiet, with staff speaking softly and footsteps echoing against the marble floors. But this time, there was laughter, bright, unrestrained laughter floating from the kitchen. Ethan frowned, curious. He set his bag down and followed the sound. When he pushed open the kitchen door, he froze. There, at the table, was his daughter Ava, laughing so hard that her eyes watered. Beside her, also laughing, was Miss Lila. They weren't just chatting, they looked like old friends sharing secrets, leaning close, plates of cookies scattered between them. For a moment, Ethan thought he had stepped into the wrong house. Ava was the first to notice. "Dad," she exclaimed, jumping up with joy. She ran into his arms, hugging him tightly. Ethan felt warmth at her embrace but couldn't take his eyes off the scene behind her. Miss Lila stood slowly, a little embarrassed, brushing her apron. She smiled politely and greeted him. "Welcome home, Mr. Cole," she said in her usual respectful tone, though Ethan could still see the comfort in her eyes from the moment before. Ethan hugged Ava back, but when he looked at them together, his chest tightened. It wasn't anger, he wasn't angry at Ava or even at Miss Lila. But something about their closeness unsettled him. In his world, there were roles: father, daughter, employee. Those roles made sense. But what he had just witnessed blurred those lines. He had never seen Ava so relaxed, so openly happy, and certainly not with Miss Lila in that way. As Ava pulled him toward the table, eager to show him the cookies they had baked, Ethan tried to shake off his discomfort. He asked simple questions about school, about the house, but his mind kept circling back to what he had seen. It wasn't just cookies and laughter, it was a bond. A bond he hadn't realized existed. Later that evening, when Ava had gone upstairs to prepare for bed, Ethan lingered in the living room with a glass of water. He replayed the moment in the kitchen again and again. His wife had been the heart of their home, the bridge between formality and warmth. After she passed, Ethan had never tried to fill that gap. He buried himself in work and assumed staff would manage the household. He thought he was doing enough by providing. But now he wondered, had he left too much space? Had Miss Lila stepped into it because he never did? He couldn't shake the feeling of being left out in his own home. It was as if his daughter had built a small world of comfort with someone else, and he hadn't even known about it. The thought stung more than he expected. The next morning, Ethan woke earlier than usual. He heard soft voices again coming from the kitchen. This time, he walked in quietly. Ava was showing Miss Lila her math notes, and Miss Lila was patiently explaining a problem step by step. Ethan realized she wasn't just helping with chores, she was guiding, supporting, and teaching. Ava looked up with trust in her eyes, a trust Ethan feared he might have lost somewhere along the way. When they noticed him, both greeted him warmly, but Ethan's discomfort grew. He gave a polite smile and sat down at the table, but inside, questions raced. Why hadn't Ava come to him for help with her schoolwork? Why hadn't she shared her laughter with him the way she did with Miss Lila? As the day went on, Ethan tried to settle into his usual routines, but nothing felt the same. The image of Ava and Miss Lila stayed with him, gnawing at him. He realized something important: while he was away chasing business deals, someone else had been present in his daughter's life. Someone had stepped into the quiet spaces and filled them with care. That night, as he stood by Ava's bedroom door and watched her reading with a smile on her face, Ethan whispered to himself, "What changed while I was gone?" He didn't yet have the answer. But he knew one thing: his return had revealed a home very different from the one he left. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like an outsider in his own family. And that realization was both shocking and humbling. Ethan tried to settle into his home life again, but nothing felt the way it used to. On his first full day back, he noticed many little changes around the house. The staff seemed more relaxed, the kitchen felt brighter, and the air was filled with warmth instead of silence. It wasn't the strict, orderly home he had left months ago. Instead, it felt like someone had breathed new life into it. At first, Ethan thought it was temporary. Maybe Ava was simply excited to have him home again, and Miss Lila had stepped up only while he was away. But as hours turned into days, he began to realize this was not temporary, it was a new reality. One morning, Ethan sat at the dining table reading through business papers while Ava and Miss Lila prepared breakfast together. Instead of Miss Lila standing at a distance and serving like usual, she stood beside Ava at the stove, guiding her gently as she scrambled eggs. Ava laughed when she spilled a little on the counter, and Miss Lila playfully teased her, wiping it off with a towel. "Careful, young chef," Miss Lila said with a smile. "Your father may think you've taken over my job." Ethan looked up. He gave a polite chuckle, but inside he felt unsettled again. Ava had never been interested in the kitchen before. She had always lived a life of comfort, where meals were prepared for her. Now she seemed to enjoy being involved, and she clearly loved spending time with Miss Lila. When Ava sat down with her plate, she looked at her father with bright eyes. "Dad, did you know Miss Lila taught me how to make pancakes last week? Not just plain ones, but the fluffy kind with blueberries. They were amazing." Ethan nodded slowly, trying to smile. "That's nice," he replied, his voice controlled. He wasn't upset, but he felt an odd pinch in his chest. Those were the kinds of memories he wanted to share with his daughter. Yet here she was, creating them with someone else. Later that afternoon, Ethan tried to return things to how they used to be. He asked Miss Lila to focus more on her official duties and let Ava spend her free time preparing for her upcoming camp. He reminded her, gently but firmly, that the household should follow the structure he had always kept. Miss Lila nodded respectfully. "Of course, Mr. Cole," she said. But there was something in her eyes that Ethan couldn't quite read, perhaps disappointment, perhaps quiet disagreement. That evening, Ava found out about his instructions. She didn't get angry, but she spoke with calm determination. "Dad," she said, sitting across from him in the study, "you don't understand. Miss Lila has been more than just a housekeeper these past months. She helped me with school, with my essays, with my science project. She listened when I was sad about Mom. She was there when I needed someone." Ethan's heart tightened. "I'm your father," he said. "You can come to me for those things." Ava looked down at her hands. But you weren't here, Dad, she whispered. And even when you're here, you're busy. I don't blame you, I know your work is important. But she made sure I didn't feel alone. Those words hit Ethan harder than any business loss he had ever faced. He suddenly realized how deeply Ava had relied on Miss Lila in his absence. And while he felt grateful, he also felt a wave of guilt. He had thought providing wealth and comfort was enough, but his daughter had been searching for something more: presence, warmth, attention. The next weekend, the tension grew sharper. Ava and Miss Lila had planned to attend a community event at the local center. They had been preparing for weeks, gathering books and clothes to donate. Ava was excited, telling her father about how they would help children her age who didn't have access to the same opportunities. But Ethan, still struggling with the new closeness he saw, cancelled the plan without warning. That's not part of your role, he told Miss Lila firmly. Community work is not the responsibility of the household staff. Ava's face fell. She tried to explain. Dad, it's not about roles. It's about helping. Miss Lila has been taking me there, and I've learned so much. Please don't cancel it. But Ethan shook his head. I want things to go back to normal, he said. His voice was calm, but final. That night, the house felt different. The warmth that had filled it seemed to fade. Ava barely spoke during dinner. She excused herself early and went upstairs. Miss Lila quietly cleared the table, her usual smile replaced by silence. Ethan sat alone in the living room, the quiet pressing on him like a heavy weight. He thought about the word Ava had used earlier, alone. She had felt alone while he was away. And maybe, just maybe, he had been trying to bring back a version of the house that no longer worked. He walked into the kitchen where Miss Lila was washing dishes. For a moment, he just watched her, realizing how steady she had been all these years. She had been there during holidays, birthdays, and school mornings. She had witnessed their grief after his wife's passing, and yet he had never asked her about her own story. Finally, he said quietly, "Why is this community work so important to you?" Miss Lila looked up, surprised that he asked. She wiped her hands and spoke gently. Because giving makes us human, Mr. Cole. It reminds us that we are more than what we own. Your wife understood that. She used to help me at the church kitchen before you two married. Did you know that? Ethan blinked in shock. He had never heard that story. He shook his head slowly. She told me once, Miss Lila continued, that no matter how wealthy life became, she wanted Ava to grow up kind. That's why I thought the community center was important. Not as my job, but as part of keeping that promise alive. Ethan stood frozen. The world he thought he understood suddenly looked different. He realized that Miss Lila was not crossing boundaries, she was carrying forward something his wife had started. Something he himself had forgotten. When he went to bed that night, Ethan could not sleep. His thoughts ran in circles. His old rules made sense to him: staff did their work, family stayed separate. But now he saw the cracks in that belief. Rules had kept his house neat and controlled, but they hadn't made it warm. He had been so busy protecting the lines between roles that he had missed the simple truth: love does not follow rules. For the first time in years, Ethan asked himself if he had been wrong about what truly mattered inside a home. The tension in the house continued for a few days after Ethan cancelled the community event. Ava kept her distance, speaking politely but without the same warmth. Miss Lila remained professional, doing her work with quiet care, but Ethan could feel that something important had shifted. He didn't like the silence. He didn't like how it reminded him of the emptiness that had spread through the house after his wife's passing. One evening, as he walked past Ava's room, he noticed the soft glow of her lamp and the sound of pages turning. He knocked gently, and Ava looked up from her desk. On the table in front of her was a small wooden box. Ethan recognized it at once. It had belonged to his wife. "What's that?" he asked softly, stepping inside. Ava hesitated, then opened the box. Inside were envelopes, worn with time. "Mom's letters," she said. "She wrote these before she got really sick. Miss Lila kept them safe for me until I was old enough to read them." Ethan froze. He hadn't known about these letters. Slowly, he sat beside Ava as she pulled one out. The handwriting was familiar, graceful, filled with love. Ava read aloud, "My dearest Ava, if I cannot be here with you, I want you to know something important. Trust Miss Lila. She is not just someone who works in our home. She is my friend. She has a kind heart and will look after you when I cannot." Ava's voice trembled as she read. Ethan felt his throat tighten. His wife had known. She had chosen Miss Lila not only as an employee, but as a trusted friend to the family. And Ethan had never asked, never cared to see that deeper bond. "Did you know about this?" Ava asked, looking at him with questioning eyes. Ethan shook his head slowly. "No," he whispered. "I didn't." Ava pulled out another letter, this one addressed to Ethan. She hadn't opened it before but handed it to him. With shaking hands, Ethan unfolded the paper. "My love," it began, "I know you will bury yourself in work to ease the pain of losing me. But remember, Ava will need more than comfort through wealth. She will need presence, warmth, guidance. And if you struggle, let Miss Lila help you. She is stronger than she looks, and she has been my friend long before she worked for us." Tears filled Ethan's eyes as he read. His wife had seen his habits so clearly, even in her final days. She had known he would run from grief into work, and she had gently asked him to allow someone else to help where he could not. For a long time, Ethan sat silently, holding the letter. Ava leaned against him, and he realized how much he had missed moments like this, just being close to his daughter, without meetings or deadlines pulling him away. The next morning, Ethan found Miss Lila in the garden, trimming the roses. He stood for a moment, watching her. She worked with steady hands, humming softly. Finally, he spoke. "Did my wife really ask you to look after Ava?" he asked. Miss Lila set down the shears and nodded. "Yes, Mr. Cole. Long before she became unwell, she told me that if anything ever happened to her, she wanted me to promise to watch over Ava. I gave her my word." Ethan swallowed hard. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked at him kindly. "Because you didn't ask. And because I knew you needed space to grieve in your own way. I didn't want to step where I wasn't welcome. So I simply did what I could for Ava," quietly. Those words cut deep. Ethan realized that while he had been blind to it, Miss Lila had been carrying a responsibility he had never acknowledged. And she had done it without complaint, without seeking recognition. That weekend, Miss Lila invited Ava to the community center again. Ethan hesitated, but Ava looked at him with hopeful eyes. Something inside him shifted. He thought about the letter, about his wife's trust, and about the box of promises. "Can I come too?" he asked softly. Ava's eyes widened with surprise, then lit up with joy. "Of course, Dad. You'll see, it's amazing." The next day, the three of them went together. The community center was small but alive with energy. Children ran around with books in their hands, volunteers sorted donations, and the kitchen smelled of fresh bread. Ethan watched as Miss Lila moved confidently among them, guiding teenagers, encouraging parents, and speaking with warmth to everyone she met. He was struck by how respected she was. People greeted her not as a maid, but as a leader. She organized a cooking class, showing young teens how to prepare simple, healthy meals. Parents thanked her for keeping their kids motivated. A teacher spoke about how Ava had started helping with tutoring sessions, inspired by Miss Lila's example. Ethan stood quietly, watching all of this unfold. For the first time, he saw Miss Lila not as an employee, but as a person, a woman with wisdom, strength, and influence. She was shaping lives, not just cleaning rooms. When Ava proudly presented a small scholarship idea she had been working on with Miss Lila, an initiative to help local students afford school supplies, Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He realized his daughter was growing into a compassionate leader, and it was largely because of the guidance she had received from the very person he had tried to keep at arm's length. Later, as they walked back to the car, Ethan spoke honestly. "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid of being replaced, of losing my place in my daughter's life. I hid behind rules because I thought they would protect me from that fear. But I see now that love doesn't replace, it adds. You haven't taken my place, Miss Lila. You've been filling a space I left empty." Miss Lila smiled gently. "Children need more than one kind of love, Mr. Cole. You are her father. Nothing changes that. I was only keeping a promise, and trying to honor your wife's wishes." For the first time in years, Ethan felt humbled. He had built skyscrapers, signed billion-dollar contracts, and commanded respect in the corporate world. Yet here, in the quiet presence of a maid who was more than what her title suggested, he learned one of the most valuable lessons of his life: family is not just blood or duty, it is the people who show up when you need them most. That night, as they returned home, Ethan looked around the house with new eyes. It no longer felt like just a mansion. For the first time in a long while, it felt like a home. The week after their visit to the community center was unlike any Ethan had experienced in years. For the first time, he tried to slow down his business calls and spend more time at home. He found himself sitting at the dinner table longer, listening to Ava's stories about school, friends, and her volunteer work. He also began noticing the quiet strength of Miss Lila in a new light. But with this change came a deep inner conflict. Ethan felt the weight of his past mistakes, the times he had been absent, the moments when Ava had needed him but he wasn't there. Guilt sat heavy in his chest. It was not easy for a man used to control to admit he had failed in something as personal as fatherhood. One evening, Ethan received a call from his business partner, urging him to fly to Europe for an urgent meeting. His first instinct was to agree. That was the man he had always been, the one who never turned down a deal. But when he looked at Ava, who was busy sketching ideas for her scholarship project with Miss Lila's guidance, he paused. For the first time, he realized that another trip might undo the fragile progress they had just made. "I can't come," Ethan said firmly into the phone. "My family needs me here." The words surprised even him. But they also felt right. Still, despite this progress, Ethan faced his hardest moment soon after. The breaking point: one Saturday afternoon, Ethan walked into the living room and overheard a conversation between Ava and Miss Lila. Ava was saying, "Sometimes I feel like Mom is still here because of you. You remind me of her. You make this house feel like hers again." Ethan froze in place. The words were meant as a compliment, but to him, they pierced like a knife. He suddenly felt small, almost invisible. Was his daughter seeing Miss Lila as a replacement for her mother? Was he, once again, the outsider in his own family? He stepped into the room, his voice sharper than he intended. "Ava, that's enough. Don't compare your mother to anyone else. And Miss Lila, perhaps you've become too comfortable in your role." The room fell silent. Ava's eyes filled with tears, and Miss Lila looked down, hurt but calm. "Dad, why would you say that?" Ava whispered. "You don't understand. She's not replacing Mom. She's honoring her. Why can't you see that?" Ethan wanted to argue, but the sight of his daughter's tears silenced him. He left the room abruptly, retreating to his study. There, he sat in the dark, the words echoing in his mind. He had spent years building an empire, but in the one place that mattered most, his home, he felt powerless. The turning conversation later that night, there was a soft knock on his door. It was Miss Lila. She stepped in quietly, her face calm but steady. "Mr. Cole," she said gently, "I know you feel like you're losing your place, but you're not. You're her father. No one can change that. But Ava is growing, and she needs more than one person to guide her. You don't have to do this alone." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that while I was away, I lost my daughter to someone else. Afraid that she would stop needing me." Miss Lila shook her head. "Needing you and loving you are not the same thing. She will always love you, but she also needs others who remind her of kindness, patience, and care. Your wife understood that. That's why she asked me to stay close. Not to replace you, but to stand beside you." For the first time, Ethan let down his guard. He realized his fear had been driving his anger. And in his attempt to protect his role, he had nearly pushed away the very people who loved him. Choosing to see differently the next morning, Ethan decided to act differently. He joined Ava and Miss Lila in the kitchen, not as a silent observer but as a participant. "What are you making today?" he asked, rolling up his sleeves. Ava smiled in surprise. "Pancakes. Want to help?" It was messy. Ethan cracked an egg wrong, spilling yolk on the counter. He flipped a pancake too soon, and it landed half-cooked on the pan. But the kitchen rang with laughter, Ava's bright, pure laugh, and even Miss Lila's gentle chuckle. Ethan laughed too, realizing that mistakes could be sweet when shared with the right people. That simple morning became a turning point. For the first time in years, Ethan stopped seeing Miss Lila as staff and began seeing her as family. A step toward trust. A few days later, Ethan accompanied Ava and Miss Lila to the community center again. This time, instead of standing in the background, he rolled up his sleeves and helped. He carried boxes, served food, and even sat with children to read books. People looked at him with surprise, a billionaire, dressed simply, blending in with volunteers. When a boy asked, "Are you Ava's dad?" Ethan smiled with pride and said, "Yes, I am. And I'm lucky she's mine." Ava's eyes sparkled at those words. She leaned against him later, whispering, "I've missed this side of you, Dad." Facing the hardest truth one night, after Ava had gone to bed, Ethan and Miss Lila sat in the living room. The house was quiet, but the air between them was filled with unspoken words. "You've done more for my daughter than I ever realized," Ethan said finally. "And I haven't thanked you enough. Instead, I made you feel small." "That was wrong." Miss Lila shook her head. "I never wanted thanks, Mr. Cole. I only wanted Ava to grow up strong, kind, and loved. That was my promise to your wife. And I will keep it until my last day." Tears pricked Ethan's eyes. For years, he had been chasing wealth, thinking it was his greatest legacy. But now he understood, his true legacy was not money, but the love and values he passed on to his daughter. And he could not do it alone. That night, Ethan made a quiet vow. He would stop running from his fears. He would stop hiding behind walls of wealth and rules. Instead, he would open his heart to his daughter, to the memory of his wife, and even to the woman who had stood silently beside them all these years. It was not easy. It would take time. But for the first time, Ethan believed it was possible. The morning light poured softly into the grand house, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt it was more than just a place with walls and polished floors. It was beginning to feel like home again. The air was warmer, filled with voices, laughter, and even the gentle hum of shared routines. Yet Ethan knew there was still something left unfinished, something only he could do. He had to make peace with the people who stood beside him. He had to take responsibility for his past silence, his rigid rules, and the pain those walls of formality had caused. That evening, Ethan gathered Ava and Miss Lila in the dining room. The long table, usually set for business-like dinners, was now simply dressed with homemade dishes. This time, Ava had helped prepare them. Ethan cleared his throat, a little nervous, which was unusual for a man used to commanding boardrooms. "I owe both of you an apology," he began. "For years, I thought providing wealth and structure was enough. I believed rules kept our home safe, but instead, they created distance. I ignored feelings, avoided conversations, and hid behind my work. And in doing so, I made this house cold." Ava looked at him with wide, thoughtful eyes. Miss Lila stayed quiet, her hands folded gently, waiting. Ethan continued, his voice soft but steady. "When I came home and saw you two together, I felt fear. Fear that I was being replaced. But now I understand love doesn't replace, it adds. Miss Lila, you weren't taking my place. You were keeping a promise my wife trusted you with. You gave Ava what I couldn't give when I was away, presence. And for that, I will always be grateful." Tears welled in Ava's eyes, but this time, they were not from sadness. She smiled, her heart swelling at her father's words. "Dad," she whispered, "that's all I wanted to know. You see what she means to us. And to know you'll let her be part of our family." Miss Lila finally spoke, her voice calm. "Mr. Cole, your wife once told me that wealth is measured not by money, but by the hearts you nurture. I believe she would be proud tonight, because you are choosing to nurture again." A new beginning. From that day forward, the house changed in quiet but powerful ways. Ethan no longer saw Miss Lila as the maid. He began introducing her as Miss Lila, our household manager and family friend. When guests visited, he made sure her presence was respected. He also updated the household rules. They were no longer about distance and formality but about respect and kindness. The staff noticed the change quickly. They felt freer to smile, to talk, to treat the home as a place of warmth rather than just a workplace. Ava blossomed even more. She worked side by side with Miss Lila on the scholarship project, and now Ethan joined them. He provided resources, connections, and funding, but he let the vision be theirs. Together, they launched the Grace Scholarship, named after Ava's mother, to support students from the community center. The launch event was small but beautiful. Parents, children, and volunteers gathered in the center's hall. Ava stood at the podium, her voice clear and confident as she spoke about kindness, opportunity, and giving back. Ethan sat in the audience, his chest filled with pride. When he glanced at Miss Lila, he saw tears in her eyes, 2 tears of joy, of promises fulfilled, of family bonds that had grown beyond expectations. A quiet dinner of gratitude. One evening, weeks later, the three of them sat together at the kitchen table. No formality, no distance, just a shared meal. Ethan raised his glass of water and said, "To family. Not by blood alone, but by love, trust, and promises kept." Ava clinked her glass with his, smiling. "To family," she repeated. Miss Lila nodded, her voice soft but filled with meaning. "To family." In that moment, Ethan realized something profound. His wealth, his titles, his business empire, none of it compared to the quiet joy of sharing a meal with people who truly cared for one another. Lasting legacy. Over time, Ethan became more present. He attended Ava's school events, not just as a wealthy father but as a proud, supportive parent. He even began mentoring young people at the community center, inspired by Miss Lila's example. The scholarship program grew, helping dozens of students each year. But beyond the numbers, it built bridges between the wealthy and the struggling, between privilege and opportunity. It reflected the very values his wife had wanted to pass on. At home, Ava often said she felt like her mother's spirit lived in the house again, not because anyone was replaced, but because love and warmth had returned. One night, as Ethan tucked her in, Ava whispered, "Dad, I think Mom would be really proud of us." Ethan kissed her forehead, his heart full. I think so too, sweetheart. I think so too. The gentle lesson. Ethan Cole, once known only as a billionaire businessman, found a new identity within his own walls. He became not just a provider, but a father who listened, who showed up, and who learned to trust the people around him. And through it all, Miss Lila remained a steady presence, not because of a contract, but because of a promise, and because love had made her part of the family. The lesson was simple, yet powerful. True wealth is not found in numbers on a screen or buildings in the city. It is found in laughter at the dinner table, in promises honored, in the strength of relationships that survive fear and pride. As Ethan looked around his home one quiet evening, Ava reading by the fire, Miss Lila humming as she tidied the kitchen, he finally understood. He had been searching for success everywhere else, when the greatest success was right here, beside him.